And actually, we're going to learn about his new Haggadah, which he's created. He's created several different pieces of liturgy. Rabbi Cahan from our time at JTS. And actually, his Haggadah is sold here in Cleveland. From Haggadah to us. So we don't have to pay shipping.
Right. It's funny because I have...
Is it from, what's his name, Joe Gellis?
Yeah.
Yes.
So when we ordered the books, when we had the books...
Of course, which one? It's not the toilet paper that gets stolen. It's the phone.
You got to mute yourself.
Do you know which one was delivered?
When we... I had most of the books printer to a warehouse, and a few boxes came here. I send out a special thing to people in Riverdale. If you live in my neighborhood, I'll come drop books by your house. So I had like a whole series of friends in our shul, right? So you're in a unique position. The only other place where I can kind of say that is like you can want books and you just kind of drive 10 minutes down the road to where there's...
Joe used to be a member of our original one, Beth Am. Michael married him. So
you mean officiated, Sheila?
Yes.
You know, anyway.
Oh, so Rabbi Cahan, can you hear me?
Yes.
The other thing to know is we have a very active peanut gallery. We have a very active group, if you couldn't tell also. So we want to learn from you and learn with you. So it's okay. We want to make sure you get through your material. So it's okay to tell people, I want to just focus and share a little more before we get comments.
I'm willing to do that. However, for the most part, I'll share a few things to start out, but there's so much to say about a Haggadah, and so I'm happy to sort of I would love to sort of take questions and talk about the things that the pieces that you're most interested in about the book, or pieces of the Haggadah text that you're most thinking about. What I will ask is just that, like, that we make sure that if it's not one person at a time, that I won't be able to kind of like follow it. So I don't know if that means one person, people individually muting, sort of unmuting and asking questions, or putting messages in the chat. I don't know what's great about following it, but maybe there can be a designated question poser, so that we can kind of stay all in one conversation.
I'm going to do this question, please.
Oh, okay. With that, should I jump in?
Yeah. Sure.
Yes.
Thank you for welcoming me. So I have been liturgy has been a thing that has really kind of drawn me for a long time. Liturgy and prayer experience. I got my start really thinking about all of the details and the craft of and the art of crafting a book of liturgy. Working with my father on the Sidurim Shalom, and it was sort of after those two Sidurim were completed that he started talking about needing a bencher, and I kind of said, I think that's a piece that I'm sort of better prepared to do, and so that was my first real project. It was also while I was supposed to be writing a doctoral thesis, so I was happy to have any excuse to to avoid that, which means that the venture got done. But also at that point in my own kind of professional career, I wanted to get this thing out there. I felt it was useful. I felt, and that it would have whatever reach it had, and that would be fine. I assured my wife that we would sell out the first printing. We are now on the 11th or 12th. I mean, we're about to hit the 12th. So I undershot that a little bit. The Haggadah market it's a much more crowded field, as of course you all know. And so it took a few years, probably six or 7 years ago, the cantor of my synagogue asked me, so when are you doing the Haggadah? And from then the idea was percolating. I had a sense of what would the Haggadah that I wanted to create look like. But it took a while of asking lots of different people and to get to the point where I felt convinced that there really was a book that people wanted and were looking for, and that really didn't exist, and that I knew how to make. So that was really kind of where I sort of dove into into this project. And it's a for a small book, it's a long project. It's a big project, and it's so exciting for it to be real, to be in print, to have reached the place where I can really share it with people. A couple things about sort of the thinking about, well, why do people need another Haggadah? And the best way to kind of appreciate that, I'm going to see if this works properly, is to just look at a few things. So when you think about what Haggadot you may have a set of, the first thing to say is, I'm a big believer in having a set of books that be using a Haggadah where everyone around the table can be on the same page. Also, often having other books that people are looking at and finding interesting pictures or interesting questions or poems or whatnot, supplements specific to a particular year, but starting with the base of a book that everyone can have around the table. And when we think about what Haggadot people use in that way, there are certainly outside of the sort of, certainly in the non-Orthodox world, there are really a few. Some of you may have grown up as I did, or using Feast of Freedom, the Rabbinical Assembly Haggadah, which I have a lot of affection for, and was, I think, good for its time, and then it aged. The paper mache art doesn't seem as cutting edge as it did in 1982. And there are a lot of things that it lacks in terms of what I would want for my table, but a lot of good memories. A surprising number of people, and no one I would say is more surprised about this than Noam Zion himself. For a surprising number of people, A Different Night has become the book that people bought full sets of to have for everyone around the table. There are a lot of wonderful things about A Different Night, and I used it myself for numbers of years. I have a set of those too on a shelf. There are so many, and it really was path breaking. There are so many great things, the dialogues and the pictures and the stories. But after you've been using it for a certain number of years, and those are no longer new, you notice something else, which is the pages are huge, right? When you have 10 or 15 of those books kind of stretched out wide on your table, there's no room for anything else. And for such large pages, the Hebrew print is very small and very, very, very hard to find. Right, here's the meaning of Magi, just as an example. And there's little tiny Hebrew letters here, which aren't even the beginning of the traditional Magi text. They're an intro, and then we have Halach Ma'anyan in surprisingly, over here in a little corner. And well, if you continued in the book, you would find that you were turning at different points 6 to 8 pages just to find the next couple lines of Hebrew text. And often there's 12 words of small font Hebrew text on these huge pages, and so much other stuff. There was a time in life I feel like I could kind of keep all of that, organize my brain. Now I'm looking at it everywhere and sort of don't know where to look. So it's a great resource, and there's so much going on that it can be hard to read. It can be very hard to use. This is a page from the Sheikh Haggadah, which is gorgeous and a seminal piece. And I could never say the Haggadah from this book. And people don't really buy it to be, they don't buy a set of them to pat on the table. I don't know how many people actually have this at the table at the Seder. It's interesting that art Haggadot have become such a thing, and so many of them are meant as art and not even necessarily intended to be used at a Seder. Just like so many commentaries on the Haggadah that are meant to be used in preparation before the holiday, and not during the ritual itself. But for people who then say, well, I want to go back to, I want to just have the Haggadah. I want us to sit down and recite the traditional Haggadah text. They go back to the old standards to access and focus on the traditional text. Here is the Ketav Haggadah. I'm sure many of you recognize. This is what I used in school growing up because it has the line numbers. This is a page from a recent reprinting of the Maxwell House. One sort of issue with all of these is the translations are very old and outdated, and especially when you're going around the table and some people reading in English, the English is very awkward and doesn't make it feel like the Haggadah text is accessible or interesting. I'm just going to show you 2 pages from the art scroll just to illustrate the point. Just look at this. This is the 4 children, a sort of crux text that people have lots to say about. And here's the page afterwards with a few sort of like filler pieces, and then down at the bottom of the page, Vihish Amda, which is like a super central piece of the liturgy. And these 2 pages and the 18 pages that come after it all look exactly the same. And give you the sense that all of Magid essentially is simply an unbroken chain of page after page after page of essentially identical blocks of Hebrew words. And that is actually how a lot of people, unfortunately, experience and interact with the text of the Haggadah, which is a real loss. So my goal was to create a Haggadah that had a particular commentary or particular angle or particular issue, but Haggadah that could serve as a base text to really focus on the traditional text of the Haggadah, but in a way that's easy to access for a wide range of people, that's pleasant to use, and that help to make sense of and to give structure to this rich and complex liturgy, as opposed to kind of flat. And so we get to the Yedid Nefesh Haggadah, which we had the PDF several months before I actually had the books that I got to hold in my hand. But okay, so I'm going to look at a few pages, tell you a couple of things, and then kind of like invite you to kind of just look for a couple moments and just see what stands out to you. What you notice. I'll go through like I have 3 or 4 pages here. If we want, I can jump over to the PDF with the whole book in it. It's always it's always harder when I can't like give each person a copy of the book to kind of flip through and find the thing that you're curious about. But we'll do our best. I'm just going to pause for a second and invite you to tell me on this page, which is right, halach ma'anya, and then the 4 questions. Things you notice.
You can move closer.
Is this, you know what I can do?
I'm also telling, like, the way we're sitting is we're far from the screen. You can move closer. Yeah, there's open seats closer to the screen. That's better then.
First thing I see is 2 colors.
Right. So there are, in fact, as you might imagine, 4 colors. And if you were holding the books, I'd ask this as a trivia question. But since that's not fair, the 4 colors track the 4 cups of wine, right? So the stuff before Magid, right, Kiddush, and then the stuff kind of connected to it is 1 color. Magid through the 2nd cup is green. The meal and Birkat Hamazon are orange, and then the Hallel and the closing songs are purple.
What I do notice is you have it can appeal to anyone, to like the 4 sons. You have pictures for those who can't read. You have the Hebrew, you have the transliteration, and you have the English, and then you have comments.
Right.
So that anybody can be entertained by the prayer.
Right. So one sort of like delicate thing that I spend a lot of time sort of, and I'm trying to be really thoughtful about, is having the art and the color that makes it an inviting book, without while always having that art be in service to and highlighting pieces of the text, rather than the art being the center of attention. Absolutely. And the idea of the idea of it being meant for everyone is actually a really important idea. I am a big believer in transliteration. I mean, the Bencher is entirely transliterated. I didn't. The Haggadah is probably 2/3 because there are texts that really didn't need transliteration. But anything that you ever sing or you might consider sort of reading together out loud is transliterated. And when it's transliterated, the transliteration is always directly across and lined up precisely with the Hebrew, so that the people at the table who need the transliteration can be on the same page and the same line as everyone else. Always when it's there, always see it right. If you are using transliteration, you can open this book and feel like, oh, this book is for me. But if you think about a transliterated Siddur or other book that you've used or looked at, they usually feel like they're set up in such a way that it feels like they're only meant for the people using the transliteration, right? They are not a siddur that other people in the shul would use. And if you are a experienced, Hebrew reader and you know the text well, I want you to open this book and see the Hebrew text anchoring every page and feel like this is a book for you. So that really no one feels like they are the odd people out. Yeah, Nelson.
One of the problems I have with transliterated text, I haven't studied yours yet, is that I find the transliteration stumbling. I'm more comfortable stumbling in the Hebrew than I am in the English. So how did you work on that problem?
So I will tell you a couple of things about that. To do that, I'm going to switch to everyone. All right. So fortunately, this is an issue that I addressed working on the bencher, and therefore I didn't really have to think about it here. But as an academic, it was very important to me that I have a sort of a consistent transliteration system across the whole book. And I had to sort of work out all of the little tiny details and like, how am I going to do this, this, and this? There is a guide here to exactly how to do that. But what I did was I had several texts, and that I had transliterated 3 or 4 different ways, and I went and just showed them to as many non-Hebrew readers as I could find. Had them try reading the different one, and kind of made decisions about which spellings would be more confusing to someone who doesn't know Hebrew. Which ones would be would compute most accurately. Transliteration is not perfect. It is by definition imperfect, because you're rendering one language in an alphabet meant for another language. But it was, I think, I got as close as I could come, and I found that mostly mostly people using transliteration have found that it is easy enough to figure out. Certainly at a ritual like the Seder, where enough of the things certainly early on are being recited out loud, someone using it can follow and hear how things are pronounced following along the transliteration, and any of the pieces that like if you were sitting by yourself and just reading the transliteration, there are things that you would pronounce inaccurately, of course. But sitting at a table with people who are reading the Hebrew and following along, my sense is you can fairly quickly figure it out. Figure out like how it works and how it's supposed to sound. And also, I think in the context of a liturgy text, the primary goal is that you use transliteration when other people around the table are reciting the Hebrew or singing a song, and you want to be able to join in. And so certainly for that, it is sufficient. However, there are many, so shockingly many, to be honest, not only so many Haggadot, even those meant for less knowledgeable groups that don't have transliteration or have very little. It is often in italics, which makes it harder to read. It's often off in the corner, so you won't even notice that it's there. And I mean, it's done with sort of very little thoughtfulness. You'll notice that the transliterations here they're the same. They're large enough to really be fully parallel to the Hebrew. They're on a sans serif font that is the easiest type of font to read. and the reversing of the Hebrew and English, right, also just makes each of these sections feel. I mean, there is this, right, there's this whole art of using white space where a clean column of white space in the middle of the page is pleasant, and white space around the sides gives your eyes a rest, but a odd shaped jagged white space in the middle is just jarring. So there's a feel of the page that's very different. So the other thing you'll notice, by the way, is Halach Ma'anya is not in green because one of the things that I spent my time doing as I worked in this, one of the things I wanted for myself out of this process was getting into some of those questions about the Haggadah that you ask every year, and we ask them every year because we might give interesting answers, but we never really have answers that feel like, oh no, that's the right explanation, right? So I wanted to find real answers to at least some of those questions. One of those was Halach Ma'anya, right, which in the Feast of Freedom is presented as the first text of Magid, always how I thought of it. That makes it confusing. It turns out it's not. Halach Ma'anya is the text of Yachatz. Yachatz is when we break the middle matzah, right? The Torah describes the matzah as lechem oni, the bread of affliction or poverty. The rabbis say that's why we have a broken matzah on the table. The broken matzah symbolizes it being the bread of affliction. So the moment when we break the matzah, we declare, this that I'm holding is the bread of affliction. And as such, holding the bread of affliction, and this is one of those things that I think this year is feels especially potent. In this moment at the beginning of the Seder, when I'm holding the bread of affliction, when I'm dwelling for a moment before sort of shifting into celebration mode, dwelling in the experience of affliction that it represents, in that moment I say, uniquely in the Haggadah, this year we are slaves, next year may we be free. Which the whole rest of the Haggadah will talk about slavery in the past tense and redemption in the present. But for this moment, at the beginning, we enter that emotional space of still being in the oppression and awaiting a better time. This is one of the places where I really try to give you a framework for seeing the big picture of Magid. Magid has a structure. It has pieces that fit into that structure in different ways. It is a really interesting sort of liturgy sort of composition, but only if you kind of see the contours. So the first piece of that for me was recognizing that if the basic question underlying the four questions is what's this night supposed to be about, there are four totally separate answers to the question. Magid is not all one answer. There are four totally discrete answers. Right? There are the Mishnah says go from disgrace to praise, and there are the Talmud has two versions of what text to use for that. Those are both in their two separate versions. Then the Mishnah says do midrash on this passage from Deuteronomy, like Arami Oved Avi, my father was a wandering Aramean, and that. So that midrash is essentially a third answer. And then Rabban Gamliel says, no, you idiots, answer the questions, tell the kid about the foods. Kid asked about the foods, tell him about the foods. So at the end, Rabban Gamliel, you kind of like, to properly appreciate it, you got to hear the sound of him kind of scoffing and huffing at his colleagues, which he does quite a bit in rabbinic stories, and think. And he explains the foods, the Pesach, the matzah, and the maror, a fourth way of answering the question. Just seeing that allows you to go through and say, oh, here's the first answer. Then in a couple pages, we have the 4 children, which are sort of an insertion here of a separate text. And then we get to the second answer, right? The third answer is the midrash. The fourth, finally, Rabban Gamliel. Just that, hopefully, will help you as you're going through at any given moment to have a sense of where are we in this process, right? And most of the commentary is trying to contextualize and locate. What is this text? What does it have to do with what came before and what came after? How does it fit into the bigger structure? And the other thing that it allows you is they're not just 4 separate answers, they're 4 different answers, right? If the first answer is, we were slaves, God brought us out with great might, and therefore we are eternally in God's debt and owe God our devotion, period. Right? That's it. Right. The second answer is, no, it's not about, we were oppressed and God brought us out. It's about, we were distant from God and God brought us close. Which, when you kind of sit in that, is a very different type of answer. And right, which leads into this that, well, we may have needed to be brought close to God because we felt distant from God in slavery, but God was always close to us, right? God made a promise to Abraham at the very before slavery, right? That God always held on to and ultimately fulfilled. And then the third answer, and if you really focus mostly on the verses themselves, because the sort of the midrash on the verses is kind of has less to add. I have a whole shtick on the midrash, but without getting into that, we came down to Egypt, and there became a great nation. It really describes the suffering. And here's the thing that is this third verse is really the crux of what makes this answer different. We cried out to God in our suffering, in our need, and God heard our voice. God was moved. God God saw our suffering and felt our pain. So if, in a sense, this third answer is a story about love. And being able to kind of see that structure, those different answers, and then say, oh, these answers are telling kind of different stories about what is central to this experience, can transform like how you go through it. Transform how much of a sense you have of at any given point of what's important about this piece of the ritual that I want to highlight. Okay, I'm gonna stop there and welcome other other questions, whether it's things about the book as a whole, or about the process, about specific texts. Can scroll through some of the other.
So if I could ask,
yeah.
You really addressed in making this a lot of the issues that I have come up against too in trying to lead a Seder. And I've acquired different Haggadahs and looked through them at different times. But part of the problem is my own lack of preparation before the Seder, because there's a lot of material that you've got to try to absorb in the moment if you're not already intimately familiar with the the annotations and the ancillary material and the commentary. So what would you put in as a user's manual to use this Haggadah when you acquire it to be prepared for the Seder and be able to have a flowing Seder, because there are a lot of passages to absorb and talk about, and the way they're already written is written, in a very understandable way. But there still could be it might be helpful if the leader could condense it or direct the participants to those particular paragraphs.
So a few things about that. One, other than those green full-page introductions, there are probably 6 maybe in the whole book, maybe 7. Every other comment is meant to be. I tried to keep short enough that anybody sitting around the table can read that comment in the time it takes to sing or recite the words on the page. So this is not meant to be the do lots of work preparing Haggadah, right? This is sort of little nuggets, insights, piece of guidance that people can be sort of reading through while they're singing a song or whatnot. And so one piece of kind of wisdom is encourage people at your table to jump in and say, it says over here that that this is whatever. I've always thought of it differently, or right, that makes me think of right, the idea of really brief comments that people can just be reading at the Seder also is meant to enable people to find something that they find interesting and just jump in with, oh, I have a thought about that. That's one thing. The second thing is I think there are pieces of this text that are really really deep and really and there's a lot to say about it. There are also some that are more not that are more lighthearted or just kind of more kind of haphazard. And I'm a big believer in skipping. I'm not a do every word kind of person.
Yay.
And so I even this people start. I have here at the beginning, both as a sort of practically helpful, right? A guide to if you're just trying to hit the highlights, here are the things you shouldn't miss. But also in putting that in, a little bit of giving permission of if you're doing the highlights, that's also a Seder, and you should do it in the way that you'll find meaningful. But I also would say don't don't strive to sort of probe every text you read. Some of the texts, choose a few texts that you want to pause on, and or a few places where you want to pause and either sort of ask a question or invite questions or do an activity or something. Just a few. Invite other people to jump in with with their thoughts, maybe at a couple other places, and some of the text, some of the time, treat it as a ritual. It is like ritual performance. If you think about the priest in the temple, or priest in a Catholic church, and often, like, even in shul on a Shabbos morning, there's a significant piece of it that is about sort of reciting and performing a religious ritual that where the ritual itself, the experience, is the point, right? It is both worthwhile to sort of look for deeper meanings in liturgy texts, and sometimes it is absolutely appropriate to use them as simply the script for performing an act of divine service. So I think, right, that like choosing your spots and not pressuring yourself to prepare too much, and embracing the idea that that some of it should feel like ritual.
Yeah.
If there are other questions, just please sort of, I invite you to jump in with them. But I'll mention a couple of other things. One, one of the really interesting, exciting things for me in this process, and the last stage of this process, really, was working closely with an artist. I worked with a British artist who really talented, but it was my project, and so we went through the Haggadah text. You will hopefully, sort of, you go through, you will notice that, like, one thing that was very important to me is that it not look like what I said about the art scroll, right? That every text does not look the same, right? That different texts, so just visually you can see our different type of texts, and that certain texts that I think are really critical should really stand out. This is one of them, Hisha Amda. This year, since it's kind of everyone is kind of thinking about this, right? This text that we may be celebrating an ancient redemption, but also carrying with us the awareness that no victory is ever final, right? It is sort of a moment of redemption allows us to sort of move our story forward, and knowing that there will be other challenges, other dangers, other times of difficulty, and that we will sort of, that God's promise will carry God's promise with us going into each of those challenges. With this, I had the idea that I really wanted a protection image to sort of surround this text. I wanted it to be a lion. That was like, it should be right, because the Jewish people, like, our spirit animal is of course a lion. The first attempt that I had to make a lion was people found scary, and then the artist took the idea, turned the lions, turned it around sideways. So it suddenly feels like it reminds you maybe of the Jerusalem lions. And you get the idea that they're there to protect us. And because we had already laid out the text, and because the text is in this inverted layout where the Hebrew and transliteration together form a shape, she could draw the lines curled around it, and they could really be holding it. Yeah, Tybal.
As you were saying that, I mean, if it's a good time to ask this question, and it's in part because I'm an out-of-town member of this shul, but I'm also an out-of-town member of Beth Thom in Los Angeles. And I heard you last year when you weren't quite done. And what I wondered, because I'm also assuming that you're going to lead, that how the process of writing a new Haggadah, where you came in obviously with these goals that you wanted to accomplish, but if there are things in the Haggadah text that you came to more layers of appreciation and understanding in the process, particularly this last year when, anyway, just any comment to that about what, if there are things that you found.
Yeah. There are probably a couple pieces to that. One is that I had a version of this that I showed to colleagues at the Rabbinical Assembly Convention a year and a half ago in November 22, where I actually thought I was getting close to being done, and in showing it around to people, discovered that I wasn't. And I'll just give you one kind of example. If you look at this page, so in the this is the same page in the first iteration, and you'll see that you'll see the same the same concept in the illustration here, with the 5 rabbis sitting around, spending all night until sunrise, talking about the Israelites leaving Egypt, who were walking through the desert all night until sunrise, right? That kind of parallelism. And yet, it feels very different here. The process of taking a book that already had the content and turning into something that felt like the book that I was I've been hoping to create was itself a complicated process, and where like having sort of guidance in that was really important and sort of really helped me a tremendous amount. So that's in terms of like, and the biggest thing in last year when I was showing to people, I was doing those programs in last March when we had the beta edition, right? So you would have seen the colors, but we didn't have any of the art yet. So that was right. The from Pesach through the end of the summer was really kind of getting the art finished and sort of incorporating it into the book. There are also texts that I really came to appreciate in a different way. One is Dayenu. I always thought of this as it's a children's song, it's cute, but it doesn't actually make any sense, right? Because like, but if God had opened the sea but not brought us across, and just been like, oh well, all right, I'm out of here. Like that would have been fine with us. Like that's kind of like a little ridiculous. So I actually spent a lot of time with this, and the first thing I realized that with the first kind of aha is that the word Dayenu doesn't really mean quite what we think it means. So it's used in the Talmud for to explain a few, among other things. There are hot springs in Tiberias. Talmud asks, why aren't there hot springs in Jerusalem? And the answer is because if there were hot springs in Jerusalem, the hot springs are so awesome. Period. No. The hot springs are so awesome that if there were hot springs in Jerusalem, and you came up to do a pilgrimage to the temple and went to the hot springs, and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And you say, if I had made the long journey to Jerusalem just for the hot springs, Dayenu, totally worth it. Right? Not that I'm not also excited to do the other thing that I came for, but like, if I'd made the trip only for this, it would have been worth the trip. Meaning, this is awesome enough to be worth the trip, and this other thing is also. Now, in the case of that discussion, the rabbis are saying we don't want anything else in Jerusalem to compete with the temple and pilgrimage for your attention, and so we shouldn't have that. But in this context, it's shifted from saying Dayenu, it would have been enough for us, like we wouldn't have needed any more, which is not what it means, to God did this thing. And even if God had only done that thing and not the other things, it would have sufficiently demonstrated God's greatness and might and God's love for us. God also did this other thing. If God had only done that thing, that would have been sufficient to demonstrate God's might and God's love. In other words, and aside from just having figured this out in terms of the other uses of the word Dayenu, I sort of what got me to the point of being willing to say, yeah, no, this is not an answer to what does Dayenu mean. This is like the real answer is that Dayenu seems to have been composed as a kind of tikkun, a repair for the story in Psalm 78. Psalm 78 is this amazing psalm that no one ever reads, but I encourage you to read it. It starts off by declaring, not in precisely these words, but declaring, behold, I am going to fulfill the commandment given in the Torah of V'higarata levincha, right? Of telling our children about God's mighty deeds, just as our parents told us, we are going to tell it to our children, right? So it's literally and explicitly fulfilling the mitzvah of the Seder. And it goes and starts listing some of the wonderful things that God did for the Israelites. And then it bemoans all of the ways that the Israelites failed to properly appreciate that and complained and turned on God and got angry. Essentially saying God did so many things for us, and yet over and over and over again we betrayed God. We betrayed that trust. So this essentially, I would call this a piyut. It's really like it's a kind of like carefully composed liturgical poem that is kind of characteristic of the of sort of the late Talmudic period, is unlike those ungrateful Israelites in the desert. We are going, as we go through each of the things that God did for us, we are going to sort of assert that each one of them, we're going to recognize each one of the things that God did individually and say each of these acts of love and kindness and kindness is worthy of recognition on its own. And one more thing that kind of follows from that, which is that Dayenu tells the story starting from God bringing us out of Egypt, but continuing into protecting us in the desert, the manna, Shabbat, Torah, and ultimately bringing us to the land of Israel and building the temple. Now, as I'm sure you know, that journey was not only very long, but a journey of not only successes and security, but hardship and difficulty. And the tikkun, right, that we're trying to make here is not only to recognize individually each of the things God did, but essentially to say, this act of kindness demonstrates that God's love for us, and is a reason for us to love God back, to be committed to God, to be devoted to God. And that sense of devotion, that knowing in our kishkas, knowing how much God loves us, is needs to carry us through the difficult times too. It needs to, when you get to those really those painful moments, we remember the previous act of kindness, right? We're secure in knowing that God is there with us in those times, and we eagerly await reaching better times. And suddenly, not only does Dainu make sort of a kind of conceptual sense that it never did for me before, but in a moment when we're feeling the hardship much more intensely than we are feeling the security, and especially for me, I know sort of for most of us, like, it's been a long time of, even as there are things that happen in Israel that are concerning or frightening or difficult, it's been a long time of a sense of security. And in this moment of feeling like we've lost some of that stability, Dayenu urges us to hold on to the sense of God's closeness, of God's love. So that's something that I really a piece that I really learned to appreciate in a new way.
That's all right. Yeah.
We maybe have time for one more. You know what? Here's what I'm gonna take. I think is 1 o'clock is our
Yep.
Okay. The Haggadot are being sold through Haggadah Zaras. You can just sort of order them from the website, or it may be that you can sort of call them. I mean, you really may be able to save them the shipping and just like have someone drive over to to his warehouse and pick up copies for anybody in the shul who wants them, because I think it must be like 15 minutes away, I don't know, but
just be aware, everybody. His father-in-law died this.
But he's back, right? No, yes, but he's back in the office.
So so it's just that it may take a little longer to reach him.
But I'm sure he's happy to kind of work that out. And look, and you will see. Should I can put in the link to his website. If I'm sure many probably know it, but you'll see from the pricing. This is, and I said at the beginning, this is not. I did not make this to be one more book, one more commentary to have in your like varied collection of Haggadah. This is the Haggadah that I think that I hope you will feel like you want to have for everyone around the table, so that everyone can really be on the same page and really share this experience together. One that
how much is it?
So it's if you're buying multiple copies, it's either, it goes depending on quantity from $11.95 down to $8.95 a copy. $8.95 is for like,
at least it's reasonable.
Yeah.
Josh,
well, I specifically wanted it to be a price that people would feel like, oh, I can consider buying 8, 10, 12, however many for the table. Yeah.
And it's important I think, isn't this the one, forgive me if I'm mixing it up with another, one of the zillions I'm buying from Joe this year, but isn't this the one where you can do the spiral bound so it lays
Oh,
flat?
yes.
That's a huge, huge, huge innovation.
This, right. See, I actually like, I did the spiral bound because somebody suggested it at one of my events last spring. And I was thinking of it as being for a leader's edition because it would lie flat on the table. And then literally when they came back from the printer and I brought them in to show friends in shul, like literally 2 days later. And one friend I showed her and she took it out of my hands and she went. I was like, oh my God. Because instead of having those huge, books this wide that everyone's trying to like fit around the table, you could have your book open nice and neatly, like this, sort of fitting into the open spaces. So once I saw this, I was like, I should have made bound twice as many spiral.
I thought you would forgive my interrupting on that.
Thank you. Yes, it's
Rabbi Hal too. Forgive me if you're still there.
No, he left.
Last thoughts, sort of.
I like it. I like the whole idea, and you've covered the basis.
And
you're able. The one thing is with all the comments, and I like the comments, and I can skip some of the Hebrew and just read the comments. On the other hand, you can't do the whole Seder and read the comments at the same time.
Oh no! See, here's the thing.
Forever.
Here's the thing: is the idea is if you're leading the Seder, people around your table can read the comments while you're reciting it. And when there's something that jumps out at them, they can say, "Hey, let me share this."
Yeah.
Right, because that's the idea of having condensed. I mean, a couple of 3 or 4 of probably more, but several of the comments that are one paragraph here were originally whole essays, or a couple of them actually also got turned into essays that are sort of published online or are will be at some point. But the idea that a little nugget, something that anyone can understand, but that even an experienced person will like find insightful, and that it's not all on you.
While waiting for everybody to wash their hands, they can read the comments.
Well, I will. There is and look, God willing, this will be a book that people will have for years, and you read one thing the first night and something else the second night, and come back to something else next year. But also that you don't need like the comments are helpful, but hopefully they don't dominate any page, right? Any page you're on, your eyes, your head, your brain understands that like primarily this is a Haggadah. And if you're using it to like read and access and sort of engage with the Haggadah, whether it's through my commentary or not, or with 5 other commentaries scattered around the table, the real goal is to open this book and to feel like the Haggadah text is an inviting text. It's a rich text. It's a contoured text. One that can lead you on a thought-provoking and engaging journey. You get that?
Yep.
I can ask for no more.
Yasher Koach, and
thank you so much.
It was very interesting.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me and for joining me. You know, I have a T-shirt that I've worn to a couple things that you know, Passover is coming. Don't be in denial. But I hope this year you will embrace it. Have a wonderful Chag. May God's promise carry us through all of the narrow places.
Amen.
Amen.